All right, well, welcome to everybody that's tuning in, joining us with our Tlingit Haida Lunchtime chats. We're excited this week. We're discussing the 2020 census with Donna Bach, who's with the U.S. Census Bureau, Tlingit Haida's very own Second Vice President Jackie Peda, and then Nicole Borromeo, who is the AFN Executive Vice President and General Counsel. And thank you, ladies, for joining us. And I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourselves real quick. I'm going to start with Donna.
Guyana and Gunoshish Ak, I filing Algoa, Mamtigi Sigamiunga. I'm a Youth Census Tribal Partnership Specialist, and I'm working with our tribes, our Alaska Native organizations in this position since May of last year. Thank you for having us.
Great. Thank you, Donna. Jackie?
Nashish, kos inyo hatu asak, suka adi ayahat, kagwan tanyeth, yadi yeshitak. Thank you. I'm looking forward to this discussion. Census is vitally important to all the work that we do.
Great. And Nicole?
Good afternoon, President Peterson and members of Tlingit Haida. My name is Nicole Borromeo. I've served as the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the Alaska Federation for the last 5 years. I'm originally from the interior. My home village is McGrath. I'm a tribal member of the McGrath tribe and a shareholder of Doyon Limited. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to a robust conversation on how we can get our numbers up and explain just how important it is for us to participate in the census.
Great, thank you. Well, again, thank everybody for joining us with this week's lunchtime chats. I'm Richard Peterson, I'm Kagwantana, the Eagle's Nest House. I grew up in the village of Kisan, and I'm president of Tlingit Haida. Really honored to have this panel with us today. I know all three of these ladies and know that they are very much involved in working on the census and making sure that our numbers are up and reflective of our communities. And through this chat, you'll hear why it's just so important that we get the numbers up and the funding that it means for our communities and services to our citizens. As always, for those that are tuning in, if you like, hit the like button and let us know you're here. You'll be entered in for some door prizes at the end. And also, please share your questions with us, and we'll get to your questions. If we run out of time, we'll still answer your questions, and we really appreciate that. So I'll go ahead and get us started. Donna, can you tell us what is the census and how the data is used?
The census is a decennial mandatory one institution. Per census occurs 7 and the fourth decennial census that kicked off in January. Critical information determine how much, as well how representatives in Congress and in Washington. It's about representation.
Donna, can you tell us when the census started this year and how long it'll last?
It's kicked off on January 20th in Pam helped enumerate the first person in Chuksuk. And we know to COVID, there was a complete halt in how occurring back in was moved to extend in the census because
Well, that's the fun of technology and some of what we're doing. Donna is in remote. I think she's in Homer, Alaska. And so we're having some technical difficulties with her, but we'll soldier on. I have a question that I want to ask both Jackie and Nicole. I'll start, go ahead and go with Jackie first. Jackie, can you kind of share with us why it's so important to have an accurate count in the 2020 census and why it's so important to the tribes?
Well, yes, and it's critical. I mean, we think about some of the most essential services that we receive as tribal citizens. And for example, I work at the Housing Authority, and housing is an essential service. Our formula that we get of the funds that we get from HUD come to us because of the census data. So if we aren't all of us getting counted, it makes a big difference to the amount of money that we receive through the formula for just housing distribution dollars. And it doesn't stop there. It's also tribal transportation dollars. And many other times there's, census data gets used for all kinds of other documenting need for other grants and other programs, federal programs. But most recently, the COVID money was distributed to tribes based upon the census data and these formulas that we're talking about. So if we don't fill out the census form and we don't make sure that every one of our tribal
Wow.
citizens are counted, we're missing out.
Nicole, do you want to share from your experience?
Absolutely. The federal government, can you first of all hear me? Am I lagging?
Yeah, I hear you great.
Great, thank you. The federal government owes a special trust responsibility to our tribes. This is embedded in the early relations through treaties between our tribes and the federal government. It's embedded in our Constitution, has come down through the Supreme Court decisions and various statutes over the last couple of 100 years. The way that the federal government ensures that it's holding up its federal trust responsibility to our tribes is through federal funding formulas. And those formulas rely on census data. So as Jackie was saying before she cut out most recently, the COVID money, that came from formula funds based on census data. So if we're not participating in the census because we don't feel important, or we don't have the time, or we don't believe that our data is going to be implemented correctly, or any of the other reasons or excuses out there for not taking the 10 minutes to fill out the census data, that robs our communities of millions and billions over the 10 years between the two decennial censuses that can come to our tribal communities and villages based on this data. You got yourself on mute, Rick.
Of course I do. Well, I think you really succinctly nailed that, Nicole. Can any of you mention, have previous censuses accurately counted Alaska Native American Indians? And if not, why?
They haven't, but it hasn't been for a lack of trying. Our villages and tribal communities are among the hardest to count in the nation. Speaking for Alaska ourselves, we know this. When we tell the rest of the world that Alaska is unique, we understand that inherently. We have 12 different regions, many different ethnic groups, and we all don't communicate the same. For example, I'm Athabascan. When I go into Yupik country, I know that there's a lot more nonverbal communication that happens in that territory. So having someone like Donna or Vivian Corthias at ABCP, Andrew Guy at Chillista, for example, they help bridge those relationships. Same with Tlingit country. The census has tried to reach out and partner, but we have many different barriers that a lot of other, including Indian villages, don't have. We're off the grid. There's no roads in and out of our communities. Internet is an issue even today. Here I'm in Anchorage, you're in Juneau, Donna's in Homer, and so is Jackie, and we're still having internet problems. So when we're talking about villages like Angoon and Napaskiak, they're just not getting that same broadband dial-up. And the same thing with other infrastructure, telephones and faxes. It costs thousands of dollars to get out to our small villages. St. Paul these days, out in the Aleutians, Bering Sea, that takes about $2,000 a ticket to get out there. So it's expensive. And the census has to figure out how to work better with Alaska Native partners. Donna's done a tremendous job, probably the best that we've seen in recent times, but we still have a ways to go.
And Rick, if I can just add to that.
Please.
So, you know, many decades ago, tribes always complained about the census data and how big the undercount was. In fact, we spent most of our time just trying to determine what was the undercount of in our communities. The last census and this census, the last 2 decades, the tribes have really been working in partnership with census, trying to make sure that we address this undercount to the best of their ability and the tribe's ability. Because in the last 2 decades, the census data has been used more often than not for determining the needs for these grants that I talked about. And so, you know, census has a whole Native American campaign. They've partnered with, you know, national organizations and regional organizations, and have really urged us to hire people locally in our villages. And, you know, COVID kind of made that a little bit different this time. And that's why, you know, things like reaching out to social media and making sure that all Native organizations are involved makes a big difference. And I'm just so glad that Central Council sees how valuable this is.
Well, Jackie, you really went into the
To know on that, Jackie.
Oh, go ahead, Donna.
No, we couldn't do as see it wasn't through partnerships with AFN, our tribal or our tribal affiliate nonprofits that census data to you know, service grant and funding pursuits. And so we really appreciate the continued partnership and the support of AFN and the Alaska Census Working Group and the numerous complete count committees that include Central Council, but all across regional areas, remote rural Alaska have really helped a lot.
Great. Nicole, from your experience, you know, I think Jackie and Donna just talked about the partnering, but, you know, I know AFN, I sit on the board there, and I know that you guys have really taken the lead in helping partner and could make those connections. Can you talk a little bit about that and how AFN's made those connections and partnerships?
Absolutely. Well, we had a opportunity to perform outreach in rural Alaska, working with the Native American Rights Fund and also the National Congress of American Indians, who subgranted us larger block grants that they had received. And through additional donations from our board member entities, we were able to engage in a very aggressive ground game in rural Alaska to provide outreach in all of the villages. We started rather late because this is not something that we were originally budgeted for, and we performed outreach to 228 different tribes and villages, and our goal was to get an outreach specialist from the community on the ground there. And we're really proud that we were able to hire 185 outreach specialists. So that's over 80% of rural Alaska that was receiving the message. We did have some attrition because of the global health pandemic, which unfortunately we did not foresee coming or plan for. So we were able, when it was all said and done, to complete outreach in 161 villages, which is right around 70%. And what we've done is we've We've asked our outreach specialists to get the message out about how important the census generally is, but to really focus on questions 5 and 9, which I know we're going to talk about later today, and to strategically instruct our people on how to answer those questions so we can drive even more federal funding back to our communities. We've spread the message through a couple of different ways. One is through social media, because it is a large and cost-efficient platform. We've also had our outreach specialists post flyers around their communities, and before COVID really hit hard, there was a bunch of community events happening in the villages as well. So our outreach specialists would tag on to, for example, bingo nights, bingo nights, high school basketball events, and spread the message there as well. So we feel good about what we've been able to do.
Well, Nicole just showed, not only did she talk about why census is important, she showed us why census is important. You know, making sure that all of the younger children get counted. In fact, when we look at places we undercount, it's typically the smaller children in the community or in a family that doesn't get counted. And we want to make sure that all those new babes across Indian country and certainly our communities get counted in this census.
Great. Donna, so who should be completing the census questionnaire?
Well, everyone, really, right?
Everyone
should be completing the census questionnaire.
Everyone.
But who should fill it out? That's the strategic question that needs to be asked and answered.
Well, Donna.
Yes, generally it's household or whoever is diligent about checking their mail or being observant of the invitation when it gets delivered to your house. Or if the invitation, the opportunity to fill it out to make sure everyone's counted. And we know that there are a lot of multi-generation families living together. There's a wild in my little camper. So if I freak out, it's because and there's a bug really close to me. So but everyone should fill it out and count. Every grandmother is living with you. If there's young children, like the person who's checking the mail or involved, they should be the one filling out and including everyone on the census form.
So,
hey, President Peterson, can I add to that? Because I don't work for the government, so I can maybe be a little bit more blunt on question 5 and Jackie as well, or bold. We can be bolder, right, Jackie?
Right.
Okay, so who should be filling it out? Donna is exactly right. Everyone should be filling the census out. This is not a spectator sport, especially in Indian country and for our people. We've got to do the bare minimum to bring the federal resources. But question 5 is particularly important. AFN has done a couple of PSAs on this. We've even done a few in Yupik, both Central Yupik and for the Bethel region, separate from Bristol Bay region, because we really want to hit this point home. Question 5 in particular should drive who's filling out the census. The census asks you to list who person number 1 is. Donna used a term head of household. That's typically associated with IRS though, when people think about head of household for tax purposes. Put that out of your mind right here. We don't care who the head of household is for filling out the census. We don't care if the person filling out the census works outside of the home, only works out inside of the home raising the family, owns the home, doesn't own the home, rents, or is on the title or not on the title. What we care about for person number 1 is whether or not they're native or not. And what we're instructing is that if person number 1 is Native, and especially if they live in a non-Native household, so I'll use myself for example. I'm Alaska Native. I am married to a Filipino Chinese Scot from the islands. He's not filling out our census. I'm filling out this census for my family, and I'm going to put myself in as person number 1, because on question 5, when we get there, our whole house will be counted as a Native house, and we are a 6-member house. And since I'm person number 1, that's 6 more boxes, if you will, that get added to the tally for our people in formula. If he was counted as person number 1, our household would not be counted as a Native household, even though he's the only non-Native living here.
Great example.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead, Jackie.
no, I just said that is just so critical, because we just tend to like answer forms with thinking, many times the male spouse is the head of household, and for census it needs to be the Native person who's the head of household.
But of course we know, especially in Athabascan and Tlingit country, who the head of household is, right?
We do.
So this should be a no-brainer for at least our regions.
So women, make sure that you're in charge. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it's no accident that our panel are all women. Right? We know who the boss are. So we kind of jumped around a little bit and kind of answered some of the questions. But I think one of the things I want to really zone in and how do tribal citizens fill out the race question correctly? Because, we want our tribes identified, but the problem is, as a Tlingit, I grew up with the organized village of Kisan. That's definitely not my race identification, but how do you want to make sure your village is the one that really gets that recognition?
So on that question, we wanted to be able to associate Alaska Native tribe, and you can answer a number of, you can say Tlingit and Haida. You can also answer, Cake Tribal, but you are supposed to be able to put multiple tribal affiliations in that answer. I have heard, and Donna can speak to this maybe, but I have heard from some people that they found it difficult in the online version to put multiple tribal affiliations.
My understanding that people can list up to 6 tribes if they're affiliated, or I'm from Haines or Klukwan, but my spouse is from Angoon or Huna. Like that affiliation, there's an opportunity to, and I believe it's 200 character spaces on the online version. So you can, list that affiliate tribes for all of us, blended, intergenerational across Alaska. I've met people on Prince of Wales that had ties up in Utqiagvik and Barrow. And so paying attention to that question is particularly important, which may help, with funding streams for, these tribal organizations across our state.
So Donna, one of the things with our population is, unfortunately, we have a high number of homeless or transient population. How does the Census Bureau count people without a permanent residence?
There's special enumeration or census taking efforts in the field to count transitory, non-shelter outdoor locations. And originally the homeless population specifically was supposed to be counted in late April and early May, but that has now shifted to September 23rd, 24th, 25th. It's going to be a count that's going to occur similar to like a springtime month where the weather may be, colder. And that is, that's an update also due to COVID. it was pushed out until late September. There's also enumeration methods for transitory locations, like if there's an RV park, which I'm in right now, there's efforts that happen nationwide where people are counted only once and in the right place. You know, another one is marinas. If people are living in a houseboat or living in marina, that there's an enumeration effort specialized for that. I hope that helps.
Absolutely, thank you.
President Peterson, I'd like to just add one thing. You know, we experience a lot of, especially with our younger adults, something like couch surfing. They don't have a real place to live, but they stay with relatives and move to the next relative. Or, you know, people that are have multiple families in one home. And it's important to remember when you're filling out the census, the date that you're filling out the census, count all those people that are staying in your home that day. You know, make sure that they're counted, even if they are not typically in your household, you know, 365 days a year, but they're there now, and they are, you know, especially you know, have a transient nature, but they're there in your home. Make sure you count them.
Very good point, Jackie. Thank you for sharing that.
And if I can just add one little PSA, if you will, to what Jackie said so eloquently. We have to count who's there on that day, and you won't get in trouble if you have extra people that should, you know, technically shouldn't be there in quote violation of HUD rules or anything like that. The information cannot be shared between government agencies for illicit purposes, and any purpose that doesn't relate to a direct count really of the population in the United States is an illicit purpose. So we have to be honest about overcrowding in our homes and other things that we have happening so that the relief and the funds can flow through the federal government to our tribes. So don't be embarrassed if you have your sister and her 5 kids living there, and don't be afraid to put them down on the census for your household.
Absolutely, and that's such an important point. This panel is great. You guys are really filling in the gaps on this. It's so important to our communities that we're honest on this. You know, growing up in the village, we'd have Fish and Wildlife come in, and they'd want to document how many fish we got and how many deer. The problem is we never wanted to, what is the word, tell on ourselves or get ourselves in trouble. But the reality is you have to be honest about those things so that the rules can be changed to meet the real needs. And that's really where we're at with census too. So I appreciate these comments. How is Alaska and Southeast Alaska especially doing in terms of the response rate to the census?
I'll go ahead and take.
Nicole, did you want to?
Sure, yeah, I'll go ahead and do the Alaska part, and then Jackie, maybe I'll turn it over to you to do Southeast. Okay. Unfortunately, Alaska's not doing as well as we would have hoped. Even though we got started about a month earlier than the rest of the country, like I said before, our population is just really difficult to reach. We've got geographic and communication barriers. So we're trying to do the best we can. Last number I saw, we're averaging statewide around little under 40% response rate. So we've got to get that up. Some of the regions are doing a little bit better. I do think that perhaps not all of the census questionnaires have been entered into the census main database too, because we've heard from communities that were really surprised that their numbers were reported lower than what they expected them to be. So we're continuing to follow up there. But because the census counts remote Alaska, which is most of rural Alaska and our native villages, separate from the way that they count most of the United States, we've had some advantage in getting enumerators out to our villagers ahead of time to get it done. That said, we're nowhere near where we need to be, and we're all sort of scratching our heads, especially those of us on this call, as to why that is. Especially when we see the return on investment. I mean, it's 10 minutes. If you do not do this, your villages lose we've extrapolated this about $3,500 per person. So one person not feeling important, like they don't matter, takes away $3,500 in programs that our people care about: SNAP, TANF, WIC. If a family of 4 isn't completing this because they don't think they matter, that's $14,000 that's coming out of the community for 10 minutes. We've got to get this number up.
Right. And I don't know if you guys can switch to some of the slides that I have shared, but for Southeast Alaska, we actually decided to put together a challenge. This was so important. We had all kinds of activities planned pre-COVID. You know, we're going to go to Gold Medal, and we're going to have our laptops there, and we're going to get people to fill out every place we could. And we had to totally change things around to try to, you know, stimulate, motivate people to fill out their census in Southeast Alaska. Right now, we have between 5% and 63% by community, each community, that have actually filled out. And our smaller villages, of course, being some of the lower percentile, and then Juneau Bureau being a higher percentile of response rate. And that just means to me that we just have to get out to our smaller communities more, where every single census count will make a difference in their percentage of return, and which is really important. And when we get to those other slides, I'll show you a little bit about how each community how each community will play out. Let's see if I can get my view options back again. Sorry. So yeah, and oh, you can see the slide there, right there. Yeah, great. So you can see all this, the communities right there. And anyway, in our campaign, we partnered up with Rainforest, who does great data for us, so that we could track it every single week. We're trying to get our communities to compete with each other to see who can have the best improvement. And every week we give out a gift certificate, $75 gift card, that we got through an NCAI grant to help stimulate, you know, getting people to sign up. And for example, last week Cake had the greatest increase, and so we had a random selection of people from Cake who had filled out, and all they have to do is go to the website that we have for this census challenge, and it's in our social media, and we have a screen on that too, and say, I filled out the census. I filled out my census form, and then you get automatically enrolled into this this competition and a chance to win a gift certificate. And at the end of our campaign period, you will be able to be part of a random drawing once again for some grand prizes, which are pretty significant. So, but this screen here shows you where we are right now in Southeast Alaska, with a lot of growth that can happen.
Great, thank you, Jackie. Donna, how can tribal citizens find out their community's response to the census?
Until I want to say March or May of next year. So we'll find out what the count results are when the rest of the nation will find out.
Okay.
So Richard, the screen right now has the census, the Southeast Census Challenge website address, and all you have to do, you go to, you know, just go to that link and just enter to win, and to make sure that people know that you filled out your census. And that's our way in Southeast of knowing, you know, right now, well, one of our ways, but we're, you know, really trying to encourage people to participate. And that way you can encourage other people in your family to participate too.
Great. Well, and I think it's so important, Jackie, and thank you for your leadership on this. I know you've been really pushing. It's so important to housing and meeting the needs of our communities for this. So, but we've had Tlingit Haida Regional Housing Authority, Sea Alaska, and Rain Coast Data partner on this challenge so that we can increase the census rate for Southeast. And I just appreciate your helping coordinate all this and push it together. You know, as we're all competitive by region, we want Southeast to be the best and strongest response. I know Nicole has to be a little more diplomatic than that with AFN, but you know, it's hard to underscore how important the census is for the state of Alaska. We have so many communities dependent on services that honestly, you know, living in rural Alaska, it can be life and death if you don't have transportation, if you don't have some of these services. So, you know, we want to make sure that our people understand and that they're encouraged and given every opportunity to participate so that we get the correct numbers there. I want to ask each one of you maybe to say, maybe just give some closing comments on what is the most important thing you want our tribal citizens to know about the census. And Donna, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, I'm not sure what my audio is, but we as Alaskans, as tribal people, passionate about our unmet needs, whether it's running water, whether it's school funding, whether it's more compact dollars for Indian Health. So I want tribal affiliated Indigenous is that we cannot afford an undercount. We really can't. And so an undercount can translate into, you know, millions and millions of dollars that we, as part of our sovereignty, deserve. And so engaging and participating in the census is putting your stamp on time to be counted, you know, and to give grace and honor to all of these services that our people depend on.
Great, Donna, very well said. Jackie, you want to give a
Sure.
last message to our tribal citizens?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's all about what Donna said and then more. I remember going to the archives and looking at some of the very first census counts that were done in the territory of Alaska and looking and finding my ancestors, my great grandfather, his name and where he was and his wife. And so for me, it's like, we want to make sure that we have our footprint, that we are here and we are counted, we are present, we are people of this of our own tribal nations, and we don't want to be diminished in any way. So it's for the resources, but it's also for our, you know, for our histories. It's making sure that we are forever on our grandfather's land.
Great, thanks, Jackie. How about you, Nicole? I know you've kind of lived and breathed this for quite a little bit now, and what's the last message you could give to tribal citizens statewide?
This is really the most effective and efficient means of advocating for ourselves that we have once every 10 years. We need to spend the 10 minutes filling out the census. So the federal government has a snapshot of who we are as tribes, who we are as an Alaska Native community, and who we are as the governments that they owe a special responsibility to. And there's no other way that we can get the return on investment that we get through the census. $3,500 a person per year for the census data. We have been in a recession in Alaska for the last couple of years. With the global pandemic, things don't look brighter. So we've got to bring those federal resources back. Alaska benefits $3.5 billion as a state every year based on the census data, and hundreds of millions of dollars of that trickles down to rural Alaska. So if we want a vibrant rural Alaska and our people to be healthy and our life incomes to be better, this is where we start.
I just had a takeaway from what you said, Nicole. 10 minutes for 10 years.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty powerful comparison that, take 10 minutes and for the next 10 years, that's going to matter. That's a powerful
I mean,
thought.
what kind of investment gives you that rate of return at the federal level for advocacy?
Well, I want to thank you, ladies. That really concludes our conversation. And now we want to open it up for public comments, public questions. Sam, have we gotten any questions this week? I know we didn't lose Sam.
Yes, thank you, President Peterson. Thank you to all of our panelists. We do have a couple questions here. Our first question from Leilani Wilson, Walkush. I posted a comment on T&H Census a few months ago, didn't get a response, but she was basically asking if we write Tlingit for tribe, would that count for CCTHITA, or do we need to put the full name? I completed online and we have 5 Tlingits in our household and just wanted to ensure that they're counted for our tribe.
So if I could just quickly answer that one. Yes, you can write Tlingit and Haida. You can write Tlingit. All those versions, Central Council, Tlingit and Haida, the full amount of tribes, it looks up, uses too many spaces in there, but you can do all of those. They will all be counted.
Awesome. Our next question is from Sarah Dibdahl. Does how the head of the household ethnically identify determine how the census counts households?
Yes. Short answer is yes.
So that goes back to the discussion earlier, right? So as Nicole pointed out, having a blended racial family, was that the right term? She wants to be the one to fill out the head of household so that the tribe benefits from that.
Yeah, so if you're Native and you're married or living with, you don't have to be married.
Correct.
But if you are Native and you are living or married to a non-Native, we want you to be person number 1 for the census, regardless of whether you're male or female, you work outside of the home or not, whether you own the home or not. None of those things matter. Those are IRS terms, and we don't need to worry about taxes right now or in census period. But if you self-identify as a Native and you are married or living with a non-Native, please be person number 1 and fill out the census on behalf of your family.
And I want to mention something that Nicole just said. She said, be person number 1. It doesn't necessarily say head of household. It's person number 1 that counts.
Exactly.
That's a really good point, Jackie, because I think we do get mixed up into these terms that we use for tax purposes. And again, this isn't telling on ourselves. This isn't anything other than letting census know these facts, and it's so important.
I wasn't sure if Donna had something to add, or that might have been from earlier, but our next question is from Leilani Wilson again. Would the tribe ever want help counting out-of-state members, or does it not matter for funding? For instance, we have a 92-year-old relative in a senior home in California. Should we complete her form online?
Yes, you should complete everybody's form that you possibly can. And it does matter. And even though, for example, the way that the formulas are driven, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but they're driven by populations, Native populations within a, census area. It still is helpful to count all Natives no matter where they live. And at some point it's also helpful because there will be, there's always been discussion about how can the data information about tribal affiliation help with other data resources and other kinds of reports that are dealt with later. So yes, short answer, yes. Fill out everybody that you can and give them the proper tribal affiliation.
And if I could really quick, President Peterson, that just reminded me about question 9 as well, because we covered that really quick. And you guys in Southeast have probably done a better job than other regions in getting your folks to answer question 9 right. But we get questions at the AFN level as to, I'm a McGrath shareholder, but now I live in Anchorage. So for question 9, do I still put McGrath Native Village Council since I'm no longer living there? Or do I just check the white Alaska Native box? And the answer to that question is, it doesn't matter where I live in the world. I'm still a citizen of McGrath Native Village Council. That is my tribe. So if you're a Tlingit Haida member and you live in Juneau, great. If you're a Tlingit Haida member and you live down in California where Leilani's relative lives, you are still a Tlingit Haida tribal member. So write in Central Council Tlingit Haida Indians or just Tlingit Haida. Any version of that will give Census enough of a clue to know that you're an enrolled member of Tlingit Haida.
I do think it is important to point out, though, if you live outside of that census geographic area and you put down Tlingit Haida, we will not get money based on you. So a lot of our citizens get pretty frustrated because they think they generate funds that they then don't have any access to from us. And the reality is it's the geographic area, but it is still important to claim what tribe you belong to. So I think we don't want to those get muddled together, and we want to be as transparent as possible.
President Peterson, on that note, what I've advised to Alaska Natives with tribal affiliation in Alaska is, if they're living in Colorado or Arizona, they're still tribal indigenous people of, the United States. And what it may help is the local housing authority if they're next to the Navajo Nation, or if they're going, to school or living elsewhere, it may help the Native American groups that are living in that geographic boundary. So it still counts towards something collectively.
Absolutely.
And we Natives are all about the the full collective, right? We are not a tribe of one. We are a tribe of many.
Well, and I think not just focusing on funding, but I think, politically it's important. And I seen somebody ask this question, if you don't identify yourself, how that happens in politics. I think it's important for them to know there is a strong contingency of Tlingit Haidas throughout the world. We claim over 31,000 tribally enrolled citizens. We know there's more, and we want them to know there's more. I think that's really important and shouldn't be underscored either. And I know Donna and others don't want to get involved in the politics questions, but I think it bears saying. I think it's important that people realize when it comes to tribes and our identity, we don't look at ourselves so much as a race, but we look at ourselves as a political too. And so I think that does come into play.
Well, and President Peterson, when you talk about the political impacts, we haven't really talked about that, but things like redistricting and, really the census data makes a big difference in all of that. And so we really have to recognize making sure that we are counted, which is another way of saying we are heard, will help us not only financially, but also in the political balance of things within our own communities, our own state.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said.
Any other questions, Sam?
Yeah, this one's from Betsy M. Davy. She's wondering if the survey entries are one per household, or if she can enter the Southeast Census Challenge for each person in her household.
Each person in the household, everybody has a chance to win that $75 a week. And the grand prize is at the end of the survey challenge.
All right. Last question is from Ricardo Whirl. He's wondering if we also need to be concerned that if we have a low turnout, it can be an excuse for politicians to reduce funding for Native American programs, as they could misinterpret it as Native communities not having need.
That would be an outcome, definitely. You know, because it is based upon need, and some of the programs are based upon need, and certainly the population basis. You know, we always say that there's an undercount. We try to justify it by whatever that undercount is, but our participation rate needs to be really, really high. See this screen shot right now, 64% census participation rate in 2010. You know, it's just, our numbers just need to be higher than that. We need to be able to make sure that we're counted.
And really, we don't have an excuse if we want to be honest with ourselves, right? We're at home, we can carve out 10 minutes as we physical distance to either call the 1-800 number or to get on the internet and do this. This is important for us as individuals, for our families, for our tribes. Come on, we can do this.
Yeah. Any other questions there, Sam?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. I think that's all the questions.
All right. Well, thank you all so very much. Again, I think we couldn't have had a better knowledgeable and distinguished panel. I want to thank you, Donna, Jackie, and Nicole. And I really want to thank Nicole, because she was a not quite last minute ad, but very recent ad. And as you all could tell, she's extremely knowledgeable in this area. And I want to thank the work that you guys are all doing to get these numbers up and how important it is. I think you really were able to reflect that in your presentation today, just how important this is. So with that, we'll announce our door prizes, and then we can wrap up. This week's door prize was Stephen Bennett won our David Boxley Formline sweatshirt, and Tina Cato won our Hydro Flask. So congratulations to all of you. And again, thank you for everybody for tuning in. I want to remind everybody, you know, these videos are going to be shared on our YouTube channel as well as on Facebook continually. And we know that we can track how many independent views we have. And every one of our lunchtime chats has been in the thousands. So we know that even though we might have had 50 to 100 view live today, we know many are going to view these. So please, you know, feel free to share these widely. And the more people who watch and become informed, we can do a better job. I want to thank our sponsors this week, Sacred Grounds, Smokehouse Catering, Sacred Shine Auto Detailing, Elizabeth Pradovich Hall, and the Navigators. And remind everybody, tomorrow's your last chance to go up on the hill and visit Tlingit Haida Fireworks and enjoy a very happy and safe 4th of July. Respect your neighbors with those fireworks, take them away from neighborhoods, and please clean up after yourself. And all those, you know, in this time of pandemic, we just ask you all be well, wear your masks. Thank you. And Deutsche Newsome.
Liana, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I know with technical difficulties, it's a challenge, but God be with you, and be safe and have fun and enjoy your families. And yes, wear masks.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.